What up, wizards? It is Dev, Mtg. We like it a magic, and today is a very special episode. Wore my nicest t-shirt, cleaned some of the cat fuzz off the couch. I don't do that just every day, you know? And it's also, I can ask you a very important question. Why doesn't it work when we try to build legacy decks in standard? Real talk, that's an actual question I'd like the actual answer to as a guy whose job it is to make decks around this piece. Just the last couple of years, I keep getting more and more aggravated with the constant false pretenders that get all of our hopes up. You know, we have Delver of Secrets in standard now for ever, and we were all excited about that at first, but it quickly got cut from all the decks it's supposed to go in. Like, there's a mono blue deck in standard right now. You know, the one with the counter spells and the genie that makes you question certain things about yourself. Happy Pride Month, by the way. But Delver of Secrets hasn't been in the most successful versions of that deck in like over 6 months. It's been a while. So the closest we can really get to playing legacy in standard right now is playing like Monastery Swiftsphere and Best of One mono red, but there's something not quite right about that. But however, and quick aside, I just want you to know this, full disclosure, between takes there, I went to take a sip of my coffee, right? And I accidentally drank my mic. I went for a second. Why do you trust me? I mix my hands up. Why would you trust a guy that mixes his hands up? But anyway, let's finish introing this thing. We got to get on with it. However, there is a deck that's been legendary in Legacy for a long time, quite the pedigree this one has. And amazingly, we have all of the pieces to make a similar build in Standard, and no one's doing it, which is a huge surprise to me, because when you really look at all the tools we have available to us in Standard, I feel like this deck was inevitable. Was it worth the slight pause there? I'm not actually sure that it worked. But anyway, let's talk about Standard Death and Taxes today.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. We got some deck teching to get to, but first, quick word from our sponsors. This video is brought to you by you. I turn down sponsorships all the time because I don't want to pitch like online groceries or coupon codes or whatever garbage they're trying to get me to pitch to you. I don't feel right doing it, so mostly we just survive off of Patreon around here, and I don't take a whole lot of sponsorships. Doesn't preclude me from doing so, but at the same time, I never want to feel like a sleazebag, and most of the stuff in my inbox is sleazebag stuff that I do not want to take because I actually care. So just, just think about it is all I'm saying. Link in the description, patreon.com/SBMTG. The whole reason we're doing this video because the patrons voted on it. Just $1 a month to vote on stuff. Self-promotion over. Just to help a player out is all I'm trying to say. But anyway, let's get to it. What cards are in our deck? Well, first of all, just like Delver and Monastery Swiftspear, there's actually a card that's in a legacy deck that we can play in standard. It's kind of a lot of those, aren't there? Was this supposed to be like Baby's first legacy standard? I'm not sure, but it didn't work out that way. That said, though, you still see Thalia kind of everywhere. There's 4 copies of this lady in our deck, and there's usually 4 copies of her in most decks that she's in. There's a reason for that. Thalia, I hardly know you. This is just a great way to start like any game on turn 2, especially on the play. That's one reason we got to play 4 copies. There's also the fact she's got a big fat bullseye on her jugular. It lasts about as long as a goldfish you want at the fair. So again, we got to play 4 copies of this. It's just that important to have her in play. She also helps us out in a few matchups that we're typically pretty bad in, you know. This is the part of the video that's actually tech and not just dumb jokes and such, but we're pretty bad against ramp, and any deck in standard that goes like way above us or reanimates a big creature, or again, more likely, plays things like Invasion of Zendikar to actually ramp that Trax into play. And once she's there, we can kind of have a hard time dealing with her and the value that she created for that matter. But with Thalia in play, those reanimation spells cost a little bit more. That Invasion of Zendikar that they ramp with costs a little bit more. Some of their other ramp costs more. Their removal spells cost more. Their herd migration, their leyline and binding and stuff. Just a lot of different cards in decks that are pretty good against us are taxed heavily by just having a single Thalia in play. Backing them up by a turn or two means a great deal when all you're really trying to do is slam the door on their life total. But if you want to back them up off that Sunfall or Invasion of Zendikar a little bit longer, you can just play Anointed Peacekeeper. We're playing 4 copies of this, and it's just a ridiculous play to go Thalia into Peacekeeper, because now they basically aren't going to play cards for the rest of the game. Like, the turn after you play a Thalia, your opponent still might be puffing out their chest thinking, like, I can do it. I can make it to 5 mana for that Wandering Emperor. I can make it to 6 mana for that Sunfall. Everything's going to be okay. Peacekeeper comes down, and people just basically scoop to it a lot of the time. Again, especially when you're on the play, because they're just not playing good cards for the rest of the game. Thalia's taxing them out of their non-creatures and stuff, and Anointed Peacekeeper can tax them out of basically everything. So if they thought they had a good play, they often just don't. But the taxation domination continues because they're also playing 4 copies of Graveyard Trespasser, another great card to follow up that Thalia with. Not only does that go for the throw cost 3 mana now, but they also got to come off a card in their hand. This really does tax, in some ways, a more important resource than mana, and that is the cards they have access to in their hand. And it kind of takes either 2 removal spells or like a removal spell on a land or a removal spell on a threat to actually deal with, and that's a huge deal. There's one more 3-drop to discuss, and that is the 4 copies of NX Sentry that we're playing. I've been really impressed with this. Like, sure, it dies to cut down, but so do a lot of things. What it doesn't die to is, Lightning Strike, but more importantly, go for the throw, which, everyone is playing is the removal spell right now. So not dying to that, it's just going to lock some decks completely out of ever getting their creature back. This might as well be a 1/4 that just exiles target creature against a lot of decks. Often after a turn 2 Thalia, the opponent will think, well, I'm just not going to play non-creatures. I'm going to play a bigger creature than that Thalia, right? Because I'm not taxed on that, and they won't get to attack with the Thalia. But see, the thing is, they've activated our trap card at that point, because the moment you do that, the moment we get to play NX Sentry, take that creature off the board, probably for a very long time, and swing in with the Thalia. It can even snatch the occasional Urabras Forge or Celestis or some other artifact they might be playing. I know that this can't snatch anything truly large on the other side of the table. It'll miss a Shieldred from time to time, and that can be frustrating. But in the early game, this is going to help you establish that tempo that you really need to establish in a deck like this. And for what it's worth, and I think it's actually worth a lot, it's a removal spell that's not taxed by Thalia. It'd be really important in a Thalia deck. On that note, by the way, we're also playing 4 copies of Banalish Sleeper. I don't know if you expected this guy or not, but he's been doing a lot of labor in the deck. The dude is just really versatile, He's a 2-drop some of the time, but a lot of the time you're not doing it right if you play him as a 2-drop. But if you need one, he can block in combat, he can get to attacking better than similar creatures like NX Sentry and Brutal Cathar. This dude can actually connect for a bolt's worth of damage, which is pretty high when you are playing against control decks that you don't really have to worry about the kicked mode on. But against aggro decks, and especially mid-range decks that just don't have a ton of creatures on the table at the same time, Sleeper can just feel kind of unfair. And in this deck, we have a way of looping it over and over, and that actually is unfair. I'll even try and prove it to you a little bit later with that example game we're getting to, but let's move on to our next dude. It's 4 copies of Skrill Defector. All 4 copies of this. We've got NX Sentry in the deck. We've got, Anointed Peacekeeper. We want to keep that guy alive. We've got Thalia in the deck. Of course, we want to keep her alive. And this is just more or less the only pre-sideboard, turn 1 play in the deck, and it can be a great one to start with. If you've never gone Mother of Runes into turn 2 Thalia or whatever, it feels really good, and this is basically the exact same thing. And not only does it protect all of our important creatures, but it also leads to some inevitability. I'll use that pun at least one more time, but being able to get through for guaranteed combat damage with some of the bigger boys in the deck can actually just prove to end games in a couple of turns if they can't do anything about it. But now, to the 4s. I'm playing 3 copies of Shelly. I'm sorry, but we're playing a taxes deck. We're taxing their mana, we're taxing the cards in their hand with that Graveyard Trespasser, and we're even taxing their draw step. I think this is super appropriate for Death and Taxes, and it's just more or less one of the best black cards in Standard. So we're going to play it regardless, but I can rationalize a reason for it being in a taxes deck. But I have to admit that usually the taxes in this equation come from the fact that we're making our opponent spend mana. And there's a 4-drop that does that a lot better than most of the other cards in our deck, actually, and that's Elishnorn. Just 1 copy of this, though. Now, we do carry another copy of this in the board because it's really good fighting it out in the trenches against aggro decks and such, but against the odd control deck and the ramp decks in the format and such, they'll usually have enough mana to where this isn't too big of a deal to them. But even against those decks, occasionally the ramp deck will tap out to do a thing on its turn, and then you play Elishnorn. It kind of didn't account for that. So now if they want to block, they have to take 6. If they don't want to block, they take 8. So it's a kind of a hard decision some of the time, This can just end games on the correct board state too, regardless of what the combat math would otherwise look like. And that's when this card is really good, but it doesn't happen every day. So I think this is kind of a perfect candidate for a 1-of in a main deck, but when you do draw it, it can be great depending on the matchup. The same is kind of true for AO the Dawn Sky. Scott Hall over here. Hey, yo, I love this guy. but I tend not to play more than a what of in most of the decks that I play in. If we have the right creatures on the board and it dies, all of our creatures can get relatively big. And of course, if we have the wrong board and it dies, we can get like 2 dudes on our board or 1 big guy. So there's a lot of great stuff about AO, but that said, I don't think we need to go playing like 4 copies of this card. It's fine as a one of. But the final creature in the deck is the one that impressed me the absolute most while I was testing this deck, and it's Sarah Paragon. We're playing a pair of Paragons. It's actually kind of hard to say. We're playing 2 of this lady right here because she's that good. Do I really have to explain this? If you get a Sarah Paragon out, most of the creatures in the deck you can cast with this. Most of the creatures in the deck are relatively cheap, right? So you can cast your Anointed Peacekeeper again, your Thalia again, Graveyard Trespasser again, and eat something else out of your yard, do some lifelink damage. Well, you know what I mean. Drain is the word I'm looking for. It's proper from the glossary. But anyway, this can get back a lot of stuff, including Banalish Sleeper, and get into a little loop with it to where you're effectively forcing your opponent to play a creature every turn, or they just can't keep up with it, and eventually they lose their board over the course of a couple of turns. There's a couple of ways in this deck we have of protecting it to where even if your opponent does have the removal spell they really need if they don't want to lose the game, we can just make sure that they can't actually target the Sarah Paragon. So there's plenty of ways to make sure this thing stays in play for a good long time. And if it does, we often win the game. This is kind of one of the more important engines the deck actually has in it, and one of our best ways of getting any real card advantage. So you want to play this when you know that you can protect it in some way, because in a lot of ways, it's kind of the most important card in the deck. But believe it or not, we are playing non-creatures in our Thalia deck, but we don't have a whole lot of room for non-creatures as usual. So what do we spend them slots on? Well, I'm playing 3 copies of Invasion of Gobakhan here. We could, I think, squeeze it down to 2 main deck copies, but this card has been really, really good for me in testing. We'll see this do a lot of work too in the example game a little bit later. This is one of the ways besides Skrill that we have in the deck of protecting that Sarah Paragon or that Anointed Peacekeeper or whatever, keeping an important piece in place to make sure our opponent can't, kill our Shelly or play that card because they got rid of our Anointed Peacekeeper or whatever. And finally, we'll finish the non-lands in the main deck at least with the 2 copies of Ossification. Now, we could have go for the throat or even a cheaper spell like Cut Down because, we are playing Thalia, right? But even with a Thalia in play, just 3 mana to remove most important permanent types, the ones that like really get us, is a great deal, like just being able to take out a Planeswalker, which not a whole lot else in our deck can actually do. Huge important thing, right? Or just being able to take out basically any creature, which, like Annex Sentry can't do, Banalish Sleeper can't do. So sometimes Ossification is our only hope for taking out like that specific kind of large person over there. Now we're about to look at the lands, but can I get a good transition this time? Can I get like a silly transition? Yes, I like that one. But here's the lands. There's 24 in here. There's 18 white sources, but we still manage 15 black sources. If you wanted to say that we've got 11 main deck removal spells in here, I wouldn't really fault you for saying that. If you count the Yaganjo, the Banalish Sleeper, the Annex Sentry, the Ossifications, then suddenly you've actually got a fair amount of removal spells in your aggro deck, and we've even got Attack-a-Numa, which you will often use to get back that Sarah Paragon. Don't feel like you have to waste it on the Shelly. Shelly's a good creature, but don't be tempted that Sarah Paragon is more important 9 times out of 10. But we are trucking right along. This is a pretty good deck tech. How you guys feel about it? But I will say, I'm getting a little bit tired. My legs are weary, my sight is dim, and I need to sit down right here by this beautiful crackling fire, have myself a nice fresh pressed cup of joe, get myself a cozy blanket, a comfy easy chair, and have myself a little coffee break. This week on the coffee break, we'll be looking at this deck's sideboard, starting with the 2 copies of Surge of Salvation, which completely upends mono red decks and spanks their butts. But this deck actually has plenty of 1-mana cards in its sideboard, from 3 copies of Duress to 2 copies of Dreams of Steel and Oil. As previously discussed, we are not very good against a bevy of ramp decks in the format, and sometimes Planeswalkers can trip us up if our opponent has been able to resolve a sweeper beforehand. That's where Dreams of Steel and Oil comes in. We can get rid of that Wandering Emperor, Eternal Wanderer, Teferi, whatever we want, more likely an Atraxa, and exile it forever, thus making sure our opponent cannot reanimate it. We have also previously discussed that sometimes our deck can have a hard time taking out larger creatures. With that in mind, we're playing a copy of Destroy Evil and a copy of Go for the Throat. There's even 2 copies of Wandering Emperor to continue to take out larger creatures and gain life against aggro decks. Those are all of the non-creatures in the sideboard. If you're going to put in a lot of them, I suggest you probably take out the Thalia. That is sound reasoning. As far as the creatures in the board, there's the aforementioned Elishnorn against the aggro matchups, but there's also a third copy of Paragon against decks that we know carry a lot of removal. And finally, there's 2 copies of Razor Lash Transmogrant in our sideboard, which will act as an elbow to the nose for any control mages attempting to resolve sweeper after sweeper. That's going to do it for the coffee break this week. Just remember, I won't be mad at you if you take out the Thalia. It almost rhymes. But now back to my thick-headed counterpart with the power rankings and the example game. Oh, Erwin R. Shyster, your move was a clothesline. Whose move is a clothesline? What a ridiculous... You see, his name is IRS. That's the joke, so I thought he might be appropriate for this deck tech. I didn't go out and buy him. I actually already had an IRS action figure. I'm a child. Let's look at these power rankings. Take the heat off of me real quick. A final score of 69. Yes, that's a very nice score. The deck just really doesn't do a whole lot poorly, right? It doesn't have all the synergy in the world. Just because the cards do taxi things doesn't mean they actually synergize with each other, which is kind of a problem. It needs a little bit more defense. I've already said a couple of times that it can't take out relatively large creatures reliably, especially in game 1, which is, you know, there's issues with that. But the biggest problem is actually the most ironic one, and that is that the deck actually kind of lacks inevitability. So funny enough. I mean, there are some inevitability engines in this deck, like Paragon plus the any creature, especially Banalish Sleeper, is a great engine. You know, Shelly provides some form of inevitability. Even Invasion of Gobakhan, when it flips over and starts putting counters on our flyers and stuff, that is actual inevitability. But to be honest, we don't have enough of it. You know what's real inevitability in this format, especially against us? Resolving a Tally, resolving Atraxa, resolving Breach the Multiverse, and yeah, there's some cards in our deck that can tax them out of some of those cards, but if they happen to ever actually get that Atraxa on the table, we're basically done. You know, we have precious few resources that actually deal with that card right now, and even if we can get rid of it with an Ossification or something, they still drew like 4 or 5 cards, and we're just going to have a real difficult time dealing with that. And just one more thing while we're being honest about the cons of the deck, right? I like to do that, is that the deck says go like 1 or 2 too many times per game for my comfort. You know, we should close a little bit faster, but especially if we don't have our Invasion of Gobakhan flipped over or anything, we're usually just swinging with like a couple or 3 creatures at a time, and those creatures usually aren't that big. So we're dealing 4, 6 damage here or there, and again, we just say go too often. We give our opponent too many chances to draw the card or play the land and actually resolve the big thing. So I want to close a little bit faster in this deck, but often it's a little reliant on like Invasion of Gobakhan or just drawing a bunch of creatures and not getting them removed, which is not as reliable as I want it to be. That said, though, there's a lot of decks in this format that aren't rampy decks against which this kind of like grindy value is actually fan-freaking-tastic right now, as a matter of fact. And I've got a few example games I want to show you. I've got one against a green-white artifacts deck that I really like. I've got one against mono-blue that I really like that showcases like not playing the cards until you need to play the cards and all that. But I feel like the best deck that I have on record for this one, especially for showcasing some of the things I've been talking about in the deck tech, is this one against an interesting green-black enchantment deck that I played against the other day. Now we start this game off against General So with a Shattered Sanctum and a decent hand, but they start with a Generous Visitor, so we know what kind of party it's going to be right from the start. We hit them with the Invasion of Gobakhan, hit one of these teachings of the Kirin, so they don't get so much value so early in the game, but they will go the other teachings on turn 2, swing in with their 2/2 Visitor and get a 1/1 token, but we'll just annex Sentry away, the Visitor for now. For now, that is. You'll see in a moment, but this turn, they're just going to swing in with the token. We will take the block. I didn't think of anything at the time that could have killed the Annex Sentry, but now it could be a Gift of Fangs, now that I think about it. We'll swing into the Invasion with our Annex Sentry, bring it down to 2, and then play Banalish Sleeper against their token. We know they're going to get another token next turn, but we want to go ahead and take this one out first with our Sleeper. I also want to put our Sleeper in the yard so that Paragon can get it back later, but we actually get blown out when they go for the throat the Sleeper. We have to sacrifice the Sentry. They get their Visitor back, they get their Kirin Touch Orochi, and play another Teachings. That was the one in exile. This time we're going to play Paragon. This is risky business here, thinking they may have a removal spell, but if they do, we have Takenuma to get it back. We want to go ahead and get this Paragon on the table and protect it from this Cruelty of Gix taking it out of our hand. They take the Anointed Peacekeeper and swing with the 4/4. We're going to take this shot in the mouth. I'm a little surprised our opponent didn't get a creature out of our yard with Kirin Touched Orochi. This allows us to replay the NX Sentry. We'll get the 4/4 with it this time. And I feel like it is worth swinging into the invasion, getting it, the Light Shield Array that is, and actually playing the Takenuma now that we're not as likely to use it. We have a Light Shield Array. We can play the Vanilla Sleeper and take out the token on the other side of the table, and this is going to be a big turn for our opponent. They get a Kirin Touch Orochi and they get to tutor for any card. So, what do they end up actually doing with that? They play a land, and then they play Tatsunari Toad Rider. We have to give them an ice for that, but then they try to go for the throat, the Sarah Paragon. That's going to take care of our Light Shield Array, but we draw another Invasion of Gobakon. Let's play that and take the Shigeki out of their hand. Now they can't channel it. That's pretty sweet. Now we're going to play the Banala Sweeper again and take out their Kirin Touched Orochi. We Sarah Paragon into the Light Shield Array, basically doing what we did last turn. We get another one and another counter on the Paragon for what it's worth. The Cruelty of Gix is going to take the Anointed Peacekeeper out of our yard and name Banalish Sleeper. They are already very annoyed. They don't swing with Tatsunari. We get Ossification here. Ossification is going to take out that Tatsunari. We are a little bit worried about it. Realize I can't play Banalish Sleeper with Kicker and then just Invasion of Gobakon, take the Kami of Transience out of their hand. We're going to swing at their life total with the Sarah Paragon and put them on a 2-turn clock here. We have 6-7, they're at 12. Now, on this turn, they're going to Jugen Defends the Temple, an interesting play, and then swing in with the Peacekeeper. I think about blocking and then think better of it. We'll just take that damage. On our next turn, we get a Graveyard Trespasser. I think it's worth not being able to play the Sleeper to play that, get the Tatsunari, drain their life total, and then get in for 6, bringing them down to 5. They have 1 turn to answer this Paragon and all the value it can provide. They can't. Good game, opponent. This is easily the strongest Orzhov deck I've made for the channel in a good long time, and that's saying something. I tend to make a lot of Orzhov decks. But oh no, don't you think that we are done, because we got at least one more thing to do today, and that is the couch card of the day. I've already done a Patreon shout out, but I will remind you again, if you like the content, you want to support what I do, check that out. And you can also watch me play some Magic on Twitch at twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. Link in the description if you want to go follow over there, blah, blah. But now, let's dig into this piece. Let's see what kind of hot dog we're going to pull out of this bun tonight. What do we got? What do we got? What's this guy? What's this guy? It's the Boros Fetch Land. It's Arid Mesa for some reason. I believe this is a proxied copy of Arid Mesa. I think it came in that wish order that I did a video about like last year sometime around Christmas, something like that. But yeah, it's a Boros Fetch Land. Tap, pay 1 life, sacrifice Arid Mesa, search your library for a mountain or plains card, put it on the battlefield, shuffle your library there, kids. So good pull, I guess. I think that's all I got for this one. Just remember, pertinent information, the description, the Patreon, the Twitch, the deck list link, links to other videos, blah, blah. Check it out. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet. I'm trying to get to 1 million subscribers. We just need 873,000. So we'll get there. Really, I kind of want to get to 150K, and we're much closer to that. So help me out. Hit the like button on your way out before you turn the lights off and do all that stuff. But for now, I'm going to get out of here and edit this video so that it's out before August. I love you guys. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.
Yep. Got an inheritance. It's bigger than an elephant. How I got it's irrelevant. I'm staying at the Sheridan. I'll wax you like some paraffin. Giving me air